The war between Russia and Ukraine continues to fall apart and deteriorate at an alarming rate. And we have to start looking at what's going to happen on the other side of this war. But before we do that, we actually want to look at, in this episode today, how we got here. And we have a really great guest to help us do that because he's just published a new book on how we got to where we are and where we may be going in the new book called Provoked: How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine, with Scott Horton. We've had him on our show before. Scott, first of all, just welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Danny. It's great to be with you again.
Now, listen, we're going to get into a lot of. I'm going to read some specific parts and get you to elaborate a little bit on some of this because I think it's absolutely fascinating. And by the way, this is one of the more maybe the most researched book I've ever seen in my life. I mean, you have close to 100 and something pages of just footnotes. That's how well sourced this book is. So it's very, very well done. And I'll just say that I recommend everybody go and buy it. That is, you see on the screen there on Amazon. So you can certainly go find it right there. But before we get started, I want people to, this is not the first time we've had you on the show here, but for those who may be new to the channel and may not have seen you before on our show, I wanted to remind of what happened the first time you came on. We were talking in October 2023, not long before or after the terrorist attack where Hamas had killed a bunch of Israelis, and then Israelis started to overplay their hand really quick, and we were like, "Hey, where's this going to go?" And we brought Scott Horton on, but when he came on the screen, it was a little different than what I expected. Watch this. It's too. So, what can the U.S. do to prevent this from escalating further?
Oh my God, I got bad news for you. Joe Biden is the president of the United States of America right now. And he
from the side of a road somewhere in Texas. Anyway,
he's not going to do a thing right here. But if he was to do the right thing, what it would be to pull the e-brake as hard as he can, get on the phone with America's sock puppet dictator in Egypt, General Fattah al-Sisi, and get on the phone to Recep Erdogan in Turkey and have them intervene in peace talks, because both of those countries are extremely close to Israel, and both of those countries have some ties. Well, Turkey especially has ties with the Muslim Brotherhood, and Egypt still has channels of communication with Hamas and are trusted by the Israelis. So
okay, that's enough on that. But it was just really interesting. I did not expect you to show up on the side of the road in Texas, but
it was a solar eclipse. So me and the fam drove down to San Antonio to watch the sun get blocked out by the moon. It was really great. And I only regret, Danny, I had in my head, I still remember this, I had in my head for some reason, I'm like shouting at my phone, which is propped up over there in the back of the truck, right? But I got the earbuds in, and it's the earbuds that can hear me, right? So I don't need to yell at all. But I'm like hollering at you like the microphone is way over there, just because that's where your face was, and I wasn't thinking. Yeah. So anyway, but
yeah, times, that was good, man. That was good advice you gave to them. Man, if they had done that just a couple of weeks in, man, it could have changed the whole outcome of that war. And just think of how many thousands, tens of thousands of people would still be alive today. And well, they didn't do it, but you were right back then. And by the way, as we're going to see in this book, you're right here. But
wait, before that, you brought up new viewers and listeners who aren't familiar with me. Then I think there's a real good chance, because I know how humble you are, that they never got a chance to hear me say that. Don't you guys know that Daniel L. Davis, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis, is the great hero of the Afghan war? And that just like Matthew Ho tried to warn Barack Obama not to do the escalation, the giant surge escalation in 2009, Danny Davis is the heroic whistleblower who came out in 2012 and said David Petraeus is a liar. The surge failed. It made everything worse, and we got to get out now because we cannot win. And I promise you now, just as he told me on the show then, this war is a fool's errand. There's nothing we could do. I asked Danny Davis, I said, yeah, but what if I gave you an extra 500,000 men and an actual talented general instead of David Petraeus, the great American fraud? And Danny said, nope, it would still be a fool's errand. And that's why my book on Afghanistan is called that. It's because that's what Danny Davis said back in 2012 and 2013. We should not be doing this. And people should go, you can read about it in my book, but you can also read his article that he wrote for the Armed Forces Journal and read all the great journalism about his heroic exploits there. I mean, this is a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army breaking ranks to go public and tell the truth and call the general in charge of the war a liar. Because why? Because he's loyal to his men. Those enlisted men are his men, and it's his job to protect them. So that's what he did.
Well, thank you. So anyway, sorry, I'm not comfortable with praise and whatnot.
Well,
so,
tough. You're a tough guy. I know you can take it.
I'll deal with it. I will. But let's get back to your book right here. Wanted to look at Provoked because interesting. Your subtitle is. I know when you wrote this, it probably seemed like it was that's where it was going to end up, which is how Washington started the new Cold War with Russia. But man, we're at the point right now where we might get a damn hot war with Russia and not a Cold War. I want to show you a couple of things that have been happening just recently. Of course, we've been talking about, and it's all over the news about the fact that what is it? It was like 10 days or so ago, Biden gave authorization for Ukraine to use long-range weapons, even though the American electorate had spoken and elected his rival Donald Trump to come in because he wanted to get rid of the war and negotiate an end. And so instead of letting that play out, he decided to take action to escalate the situation, allow long-range weapons to be used. They were just days later. Then Russia fired this Oreshnik as a shot across the bow that said, hey, we are serious about this. If you keep letting that happen, we're going to take more action. And then we allowed it again after that. And as of just yesterday, Russia said there will be a response to this as well. And so in that light, watch this exchange just a couple of days ago in the UK, where first of all, you're going to see the British general who's in charge of their military talking about what they can do. And then the British Secretary or Minister of Defense who's talking about some other things. And I'll get your view on the backside of this.
If the British Army was asked to fight tonight,
yes,
it would fight tonight. And I don't think anybody in this room should be under any illusion that if the Russians invaded Eastern Europe tonight, then we would meet them in that fight.
On Ukraine, this is a serious moment that I come before the committee. Defence intelligence will reveal today that the front line is now less stable than at any time since the early days of the full-scale Russian invasion in February 22. And we've seen in recent weeks a very clear escalation from Putin and his forces. They've stepped up attacks on the energy system in Ukraine ahead of winter. They've stepped up attacks on civilian centres, killing children. They've deployed at least 10,000 North Korean troops to the battle. And there are unconfirmed but media reports today of Russia firing a new ballistic missile into Ukraine, which we know, have been preparing for months. So that while the Ukrainian actions on the battlefield speak for themselves, Mr. Chairman, be in no doubt that the UK government is stepping up our support for Ukraine, determined to continue doubling down our support for Ukraine.
Scott, what in the hell? The war is over. It's been over for a long time. The only question is going to be, how bad is Ukraine going to lose? But there is no possibility at all for this to ever end on any kind of equitable terms. So the only thing that makes any sense is to rationally just bring this to an end. Why can you explain to me why then the British are ready to escalate into an actual war against Russia at this late hour?
I don't know, man. Huge clumps of neurons in my head say they're not. They're just bluffing. They're not going to do that. How the hell are they going to put a land army in there without the United States? And why would they expect that, the train wouldn't get blown up on the way there, or that their troops would be safe? I mean, remember the beginning of the war when the Russians hit the Foreign Legion forces gathering in the far west of the country and sort of said, you might not make it to the front. Welcome to Ukraine, would-be volunteers. I would expect, if they were to do anything like that, for the Russians to then launch a full-scale mobilization and probably crush the rest of the country. And I don't think the Brits could do a damn thing about it. What field army do they have? America is Britain's army.
Well,
just like Saudi Arabia's army.
I think the total active force in the United Kingdom is 168,000. And when you narrow that down to how many actual fighters do they have, I would wager that's probably somewhere between 50 or 60,000.
Right.
Russia has, by contrast, about 700,000 total fighters in Ukraine, not in their armed forces, but just in Ukraine right now. So not sure how that's going to work, but help me make sense of this. What's the value of bluffing now when you can't make good on it? And what? And just comment. Why is he wanting to double down now? What? I mean, even if it's nefarious and bad, what is the value for UK to make those statements?
Okay, so there's a theory that's going around I've heard, and I had tended to take the other side of this, but this certainly makes it, this would fit with what you're saying as an answer. That the goal is to try to force Putin to react in such a way that it narrows Donald Trump's options when he comes in. That if Putin were to escalate to a certain degree, then that would change the political calculus in Washington, and Donald Trump would also have to do another bigger tough guy move before he can negotiate in good faith in order to prove his point and to not let the Russians get away with X, Y, or Z. And so I think it would make sense that was what they're trying to do there. Now, my previous theory, or I don't know, this is also just speculation. I had thought, and maybe because I try real hard not to be an alarmist, because I'm usually wrong if I'm too alarmist. So I don't know. I try to go with a conservative estimate, and it seemed to me that one possible explanation was that the Biden government knows good and well that they just lost the election to a guy who said he wants to end the war. And they know good and well that Putin knows that good and well. And so they think that they can be cute, essentially, and get a few sucker punches in, escalate with these new longer range missiles and this kind of thing in order to try to, as they would put it, right, as McMaster would say, bloody their nose a little bit, get a few more shots in on the bet that Putin won't overreact, that he won't do anything, certainly too bad, like escalate to nukes or hit London or truly draw the West into a full-scale war between NATO and Russia. That whatever he'll do, he'll escalate inside Ukraine, as we've seen with those new missiles that he deployed, and that it'll just be at their expense. And to Washington and London, they're nothing but cannon fodder anyway. They don't care what happens to the Ukrainians. They've made it very clear. And so I guess that's their calculation or those are like, I guess, two options or maybe kind of two poles of the same argument, that he won't do anything too stupid that'll hurt us, but maybe we can get him to do something stupid enough that it'll ruin the chances for peace talks and allow the war to proceed. After all, this is just debated Neil Ferguson, the British imperialist theorist, and he was saying that, look, it's really hard to negotiate when you're in a position of weakness. Donald Trump is inheriting Ukraine's position in this war, and the Russians are absolutely dominant on the ground there. And so what are they going to do? They're going to have to just give away the store. It's going to be very difficult for them to do that when the Russians are in the position, as you said in your introduction, to make whatever demands they wish. We want to draw the line here. Maybe we'll draw it there. So what is the other side of the argument from Washington's point of view on that? Donald Trump puts Donald Trump and his men, who are all absolutely horrible hawks. I mean, can you imagine? Marco Rubio is going to be leading the State Department during these negotiations. So it puts America and Russia and Ukraine still in a very difficult situation.
Well, it does. And in fact, let's look at the other half. But one of the things that they had mentioned in there is they're continuing this long-standing view in the West that Putin is evil. He's Hitler incarnate. Everything he does is bad. And by the way, everything is their fault. They've done everything. We're basically just innocent victims here. And that's why I think one of the reasons he wanted to double down. Well, one of the things the secretary, the defense secretary, didn't say in that comment there, that long string he talked about of all the escalation that Russia's doing, he kind of left out part of what the West had done that prompted Putin's action here. Vladimir Putin, on the other hand, did not leave it out.
I'm talking about what happened in the wake of long-range Western weapons being used in the Special Military Operations Zone. As a result of the escalation, the United States and their NATO allies said that they give their permission to use long-range weapons against targets inside Russia. Experts know fully well And the Russian side has underscored this time and again that using such weapons without the direct involvement of military operators from manufacturing countries is impossible.
And so that's what led him to fire the Oreshnik missile that was demonstrated in Dnipro.
Let me interview you about that for a minute. Please tell me everything you know about that missile. I know that the original claim was it was an ICBM, which sounded stupid, and it was the Ukrainians who said that, so that couldn't be right. So, but what is it? Is it a glider? Because I guess a ballistic missile coming in, an ICBM is hypersonic, right? They come in from space at Mach 8 or something like that already, and they're falling. Right, that's what ballistic means, is they're not even powered. Yeah. They're just falling in from space at Mach 8. So are these hypersonic gliders? They're jet powered, ramjet, this, that, whatever. Do you know? Can you explain?
Best we can ascertain so far is that it was a what's called a MIRV, M-I-R-V, multiple warheads. So it was one missile that had 26, I think is the latest number that we believe, that came down in different waves. So it was actually, and you could see that on a lot of the videos, it was like 6 at a time would come in at this at Mach 10.
And it was one missile that launched them all. Do we know that?
Yes, that's the best case. That's what we understand, that this was one missile that had all these different warheads.
And 24 MIRVs on it, huh? So it's like a Sarmat in terms of its size there. Is that correct?
And it's non-nuclear impact at the strategic level. Yeah, that's actually what they intended. And so this is
really going Mach 8. They don't look like they're going Mach 8, Mach 10 to me. Is that right?
It looks pretty fast, actually. And when you compare this with the missiles that we had Ted Postel on to actually analyze this a couple of days ago, and when he compares this with the missiles that came in from Iran into Israel recently, he said they are substantially faster, and those were coming in pretty fast. The missiles that Iran fired, so these are much faster than that, and it, by all accounts, probably is that fast. So,
and look, this is all W. Bush and Donald Trump's fault. And look, I know I hate the Democrats more than anyone here. Waco might as well still be burning to me. Okay, so don't get me wrong here. But it was you could love Donald Trump. You could love him and want to be his stepson. Still, it was a terrible error to tear up that Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. That was Ronald Reagan's great achievement of 1987 that got rid of all mid and so-called intermediate range missiles. I think those are separate categories, depending on who you ask.
Yeah.
But you know, between the short and the long range missiles out of Europe, no nuclear missiles in Europe. We have nuclear bombs there, planes and bombs there, but we've had no nuclear missiles in Europe since 1987. And now they ruined that. And I don't know for sure, but I guess I had read one report that said the Russians at least claimed that they developed this missile in response to that move.
Yeah, Putin expressly did say that. We had him on the show.
He himself said that, huh?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, direct and unequivocal on that. But so here's the problem, is where we're at right now. So after that missile was fired, then he again, Putin made it very clear that we'll continue to respond if you do anything further, probably thinking that, okay, this will be enough to wake them up and at least don't do anything else stupid between now and January 20th. But instead, we did something else stupid before January 20th. We allowed more ATACMS missiles to be used, 2 more strikes after that. And so now then yesterday, Russia said, we will respond again. And now then the question is, what are they going to do next? So I guess it was last night, our time, there was an announcement that the same launch facility that launched the Oreshnik missile closed the airspace around until 30 November. And now then the expectation is that something's coming. And one of the signals that this is going to be much more problematic than the last one is that you have Russian cities are worrying about bomb shelters. Watch this this report here from the mayor of Leningrad. I think this was just yesterday.
God dang.
We must bring all underground rooms, all basements that meet the shelter requirements to at least this condition, so that it is dry, there are benches and a supply of water, the ability to go to the toilet in order to temporarily wait out some emergency situation. There's no time for talk. The deadlines are extremely tight. We already need to make radical decisions.
Now, I'm told from some Russian sources and people who follow the Russian Telegram channels and possibly have some context elsewhere, that something serious is coming this time, like much worse than before, which leads me to believe that it may be against a Western target this time, whether outside of Ukraine or inside of Ukraine, it's not sure. But the fact that Russia seems to be preparing for something in response to that really has me worried. Do you think we would be that stupid?
Oh, man, there's a lot of stupid going on in Washington and London right now, Danny. Let me ask you, I want to clarify, make sure here that's from St. Petersburg. You saying they're outside of the range of the ATACMS, right? So that's not what they're talking about, correct?
That's the implication, yeah, because it is way up north of the range of that, so it probably is beyond the range of the ATACMS, which would imply that they're worried about some kind of response to this next missile from NATO.
Well, look, when I was a boy, I was afraid of nuclear wars. 1983 was the greatest brinksmanship, since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and up until now. And my dad told me that, look, nobody wants a nuclear war. Everybody understands. Ronald Reagan, he's playing brinksmanship and kind of wish he wouldn't, but he doesn't want a war. He's trying to stop one, and the Russians don't want one either, and it'll probably work out. So that's what he told me in 1983. I'm sticking with that. Because it just put yourself in Putin's position. They say that the guy's an insane psychopath, killer, and all this stuff. I don't think that's right. I mean, he's been in power for 25 years almost. He is clearly all business when it comes to being a statesman, which is, like, by definition, a psychopathic, sociopathic job to hold. Whatever his personal psychological problems, he clearly does not mind killing people when he thinks that he has to. But at the same time, he usually is very cold and calculated and not an emotional, kind of reactionary type. And so, Danny, he must be thinking that, as bad as it looks and as bad as I'm sure public pressure inside Russia is, he's got to bide his time till January 20. What is he going to do? He's going to ruin the chance of negotiations. He's going to let Biden bait him into blowing up the chance to have everything he wants. And instead, he's going to go to war. He's going to stay at war, and including against the guy who's his one chance of getting along, Donald Trump. And he's going to ruin all that because he's just too impatient to wait till January.
Well, here's the compounding
were a
problem.
real game changer. If I thought that, look, this is the Russian military is in real trouble now that they broke out these ATACMS or something, maybe that would be different. But let me counter my own argument here by saying, Danny, it really, really bothers me that we're having this talk and it's not even Thanksgiving yet, right? If we were having this talk and it was the middle of December, I would feel a lot better about, well, he could probably wait 6 weeks. I don't know. But, like, how bad? And look, he could drop all these warheads on Lviv. He doesn't have to hit Warsaw. He doesn't have to hit Berlin or London. He could vastly escalate, but still wholly within Ukraine. And that way have his say, have his reaction, and not let America get away with it without turning this into a big, stupid general war that, of course, America would die, but Russia would also cease to exist in the case of a general war with the United States. Everybody hiding out in little metal trailers will be dead by H-bomb. St. Petersburg won't exist if there's a general war between the United States and Russia. And there's probably hundreds of bombs targeted just at St. Petersburg. Dozens, anyway.
But here's the problem. Of course, they don't want it to go that far, and that's why they would be taking action short of that in order to prevent it from going there, which Putin has said many times, even this recently as this summer, there would be no winner in a nuclear war. So he's not under any illusion that he could win a nuclear war, but he seems to be very clear that he's willing to wage one if forced into it. So that's why I think that something non-nuclear, again, is probably the next thing, but at a higher level target. And the one of the things that mitigates against your comment about Putin waiting until January 20th is that he's got a lot of pressure inside the Kremlin. And I've had this from two separate sources that say they've talking to Russian people and that there is a lot of pressure on him to act. And so he is not as independent of a dictator as many in the West like to characterize him. And we don't know if that pressure is going to be, is going to rise up to the level. My worry is that we may not get a chance to have a Cold War 2.0. we may be thrust into a new war here because, and let me show you something. This was a CNN interview, I think just last night. And I want you to see the lack of concern on our part and this arrogance that we're in control of everything.
A range of U.S. officials that I've spoken to have confirmed is that the Russians are involved in a much more aggressive campaign of sabotage and subversion across Europe, particularly Western Europe. They've been involved in assassinations, strikes against weapons depots, fuel depots, targeting of oil pipelines and underwater telecommunications networks. So this is, in a sense, this is an escalation of Russian activity, mostly GRU, the main intelligence directorate of the Russian military, and the SVR, Russia's foreign intelligence agency, in Europe, really as a sign that that they can escalate in the areas in the kind of the asymmetric domain.
Now elsewhere in that whole segment, it was quite long. There's just this. They just talk about this, how pathetic Russia is, and they're doing all this evil stuff, etc., and that we just need to keep going. No concept at all that if this kept going, and if these things are happening, probably they are. There's been a lot of unexplained explosions and fires, whatever, throughout the West at a lot of ammunition depots. And based on what we're doing to Russia inside their country, it seems reasonable to expect that that probably is right, that Russia is doing sabotage things in the West. All of this is bad for the West, and everything that we should be doing, as you said at the outset, is to bring this to a conclusion. But how concerned are you that we don't seem to be getting the message so far?
Well, I mean, the good news is that that Trump did win election on ending this war. And if you remember in the debate, they said, yeah, but don't you have to help Ukraine win it? And he said, no, just end it. Like they couldn't get him to back down on his statement. Just end. It's too dangerous to, pardon me, I bit my tongue there. I don't actually have a lisp. It's too dangerous to allow this to continue. And so we must bring it to an end. Whether he and his men are really capable of figuring out, a reasonable way to come to an agreement with Russia to do so, I don't know. But certainly the political will is there, and on the part of the American people, who, clearly, especially Republicans, are opposed to this war and want it to stop. It's amazing to see. Saw a poll that said 71% of Democrats say we should keep supporting Ukraine in the war with Russia. I mean, what a world that we live in. I mean, if you told me 71% of Democrats in Washington, D.C., sure. But like in the real world, geez, guys, I don't know. It's just...
Well, listen, I think that part of the reason for that, and I'm going to get to your book now, because I think that you kind of lay out some of the reasons why we get here. And part of that is propaganda. And I just want to read a couple of sections here and get you to kind of tell me a little bit more about what you had. And there's a couple of different areas. There's propaganda that's provided by the Ukrainian side. And sorry, I have to wear some glasses to see the print here.
Hey, I'm the same way, buddy. I got them right here.
A couple of examples that were really famous in the press at the time, or especially early in this war. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what you included here. One was called The Ghost of Kiev, which was the War Party's public relations machine went into overdrive immediately after Russia's invasion. For example, it published the story of this great Ukrainian fighter ace, the Ghost of Kiev, who went through his great patriotic valor and destroyed at least 6 Russian fighters in Top Gun-style dogfights in just one day, and more than 40 in all. But what was the truth of that?
Well, the thing was a total hoax. Fox News insisted it was true. Adam Kinzinger, the congressman, retweeted it, and everybody on the War Party side, because as Alan Bach, the late, great Alan Bach said, people want to believe. They like believing in things. So this was one, and so they believed in it. It turned out it was literally, you can't make this part up, it was literally cutscene footage from a video game. So it wasn't even actual like video footage of a plane flying in the real sky. It was computer animation.
Oh man.
And
it worked.
Good enough. And it, it's a small example. I actually almost cut that section because some of those examples are like kind of trivial ones. But then again, not, because they really go back to the spirit of the time at the start of this war. The unprovoked attack, and we're going to retake every inch, and all of the kind of slogans that they pushed at that time. And it included examples like this of, the brave sailors of Snake Island who.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, because that was literally the next thing I had highlighted to read here. And so for those who may not know,
Sure.
The Ukrainians came up with a fantastic story about how a few of their soldiers stationed at tiny Snake Island had bravely taken on the Russian army, telling them, Russian warships, go F yourself, and fighting until the bitter end. The men died heroically, President Zelensky said, but the story was a hoax. It literally never happened. What was the issue there?
Well, I mean, first of all, they just surrendered, because what were they going to do? But then secondly, you see the point there is, Danny, how can we betray brave men like that? A whole country of these people who are willing to fight to the bitter end, and we're going to turn our back on them. See, it's all part of just the spirit of this propaganda. It's amazing that they're able to get away with this over and over again. And I understand the default. I'm a Texan, so, I'm an American and a Texan patriot. I'm on my country's side. But God dang it, man, Bill Clinton and W. Bush and Barack Obama and Joe Biden and John McCain and Hillary Clinton, they're not your country. They're the very worst single individual human men and women who happen to live here. They're not our country at all. The things that they do are stupid and wrong always. No one stands by anything that they've done for the last 20 years, but we're going to line right up to stand by the next thing that they want to do based on another pile of lies. You can read about how this guy, I'm not exactly sure the very, very origin, but somebody started embellishing this story where Mohammed Atta went to Prague in the Czech Republic and met with Anis an Ali, who was he wasn't even a spy. He was an Iraqi diplomat. And they said, Mohammed Atta, the lead hijacker, met with with Iraqi intelligence, they said, in Prague. And then guess what, Danny? You'll be so surprised to find out that it just so happened, according to the Bild, the most important newspaper in Germany, that there were Mossad agents who just happened to be at the cafe that day, and they saw the Iraqi hand a flask full of anthrax to Mohammed Atta. Now, you can't read that in the Bild anymore, but you can read it in the Los Angeles Times, where they covered it. Anyone could type that up. Mohammed Atta, Prague, anthrax, Los Angeles Times. And there's the Israelis saying, oh no, look, it looked like it was Saddam Hussein that gave the anthrax to Al-Qaeda, the guys that hit our towers. So I guess we need you to invade Iraq for us again. And so after that, are you not suffering from a third-degree burn? That was the lie that they told you to get you into Iraq War II? And I mean you personally, Danny. Ain't your hide a bit chapped that you participated in an army invading a country in an aggressive war based on lies on behalf of foreign powers? Yeah. I resent it, and I didn't even have to go and see my buddies die. And I'm still pissed off.
Well, and so that was Ukrainian propaganda, and really to the point you literally just opened up for us here again. Let's look now at American propaganda. You wrote this was headlined "Crystallizing Public Opinion." Just like when the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, both wars failed surges. The attack on Libya and allied support for the bin Ladenites in Syria, the American people were fed a massive load of propaganda by the government and media to raise the tension and get them excited for the conflict. The bad guys were very bad. They needed to be stopped. Thank goodness for the USA was here to play Superman and deliver the world from evil again. Has that not happened again here?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same old story. They play it over and over again. I guess they're playing it now. Even to this day, we're helping America. It's just question begging, circular argument. A bad thing is happening, Danny. Shouldn't we stop them? We being, the unspoken but built-in premise there, the baked-in story being that America is the good guy, has the right and the responsibility, and that whatever we do will be the right thing on behalf of right against the bad, evil aggression. But wow, what a bunch of crap. That's not true at all. Why would anybody think that's true? just because you're from here. Again, I'm from here. Hell, you were in the U.S. Army for 3 wars. You ever see your policy-making decision makers above you in rank make bad calls and send you on fool's errands before? Why would we trust these people to decide who should be killed and who should not be killed? And quite frankly, and I don't know who I'm ripping off. Somebody else said this, and forgive me for the plagiarism if I ever didn't give credit to whoever I'm supposed to credit here that I don't remember. But somebody one time was smart and said, not only is the mythology that America is Superman, but the mythology is that we're Christopher Reeve's Superman, virgin, Boy Scout, son of a virgin, deliverer of evil, right? Never tell a lie. Always do the right thing. Save the kitten from the tree. There are different versions of Superman, but Christopher Reeve, boy, you could trust that guy. Yeah. But the thing is, that's not America. It's not. America, the U.S. government, Washington, D.C., and their national security state, don't you know they killed 4 million people in the last 20 years? Got them killed. Drove 37 million people out of their homes. Launched aggressive wars from Mali to the Philippines. Ruined everything. Someone's telling me the other day, why don't we call the terror war World War IV? We fought in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Somalia, Libya, Syria, Nigeria, Mali, the Philippines, and all special operations missions throughout Central Asia as well. That's not World War III right there. Why? Because they're a bunch of sand N-word, towel-headed Muslims. And it was America that was doing it to them in virtually all unprovoked aggressive wars. But no, we get to sit up here and go, oh, unprovoked attack. Come on. America started the war. I was introduced on Piers Morgan's show last week. He goes, yeah, some people think Kiev brought this war on themselves. Well, the subtitle of the book says how Washington started the war. It wasn't Kiev. It was especially Barack Obama and Joe Biden who did this. As you know, and with others involved as well.
Yeah, and in fact, that's the next thing I wanted to talk about from your book is you mentioned specifically about the Istanbul negotiations and how the war could have been ended quite a bit early, but barely a month and a half into the war. What did you convey in that part of the book?
Yeah, I mean, it's really bad, and I think this broke into the mainstream. Pardon me. They talked about this in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and this became. Maybe they felt that they had to say this, that this was a convincing argument that this is David Sanger in the New York Times, we want to lock Russia into a long-term war in Ukraine. The idea was not, oh my God, a war on Russia's border. This could turn real and with a pseudo, sort of, kind of half-aid NATO client state here, this could get very bad. This could go sideways in ways that, the Mike Tyson quote about getting punched in the mouth and now all your plans go out the window and now what are you going to do? Things could turn very quickly and it's just too dangerous. That was the consensus of all of mankind, except Washington and London and I guess their friends and Warsaw, who said, no, we got to double down. We got to drag it out. Let the Ukrainians be the cannon fodder. In order to weaken Russia, we'll bog them down, we'll bleed them to bankruptcy. They said it over and over again. Again, the New York Times. We don't know how to fight an insurgency, but we sure know how to back one. And we did it in Rambo 3, Operation Cyclone against the Russians in Afghanistan in the 1980s. And never mind our war that just ended 2 months ago in an absolute humiliating disgrace and failure and defeat after attempting to clean up the consequences of that operation in the 1980s. Never mind any of that. It's time to do that exact same thing again. And they literally cited, I love this, they cited Afghanistan, which led to September 11th and America's war in Afghanistan. And they cited Syria, where Barack Obama's support for the bin Ladenites ended up blowing up into the caliphate, that they had to launch Iraq War III in order to ally with Iran and the Iraqi Shiites to destroy it again. And that was the model that they invoked for Ukraine. We want this war to last as long as possible until Russia breaks, until they go bankrupt, until Putin's government falls and he is overthrown. That was the way that they were talking at the start of the war. And they would say, and they lie to the American people that, oh yeah, no, Ukraine can win. Remember this one?
Oh, yeah.
People said Russia has the second strongest army in the world. Well, it looks to me like they got the second strongest army in Ukraine. That's what they all said over and over and over again. Well, that was completely stupid and wrong. Even Kamala Harris could tell you Russia is a bigger country.
Yeah, and in fact they are, and it's so disappointing and just anguishing, to probably more accurately, that because what part of this whole process is to demonize Vladimir Putin, that means that you don't ever have to listen to him, because no matter what he said, it's going to be lie, propaganda, something. So just ignore that completely. But he still made one last attempt, I think, to talk to anyone who's willing to be rational and listen on November 21st in the aftermath of when they fired the Oreshnik, and I think has given us one last shot.
It is not Russia, but the United States who have destroyed the system of international security. And they are trying to preserve their hegemony and stoking a global conflict. We have always preferred, and we still prefer, to resolve our disagreements and using peaceful means, but we are prepared for any scenario. And if anyone has any doubts, they shouldn't. There will always be a response.
Now, that's what he said before we launched the second round of ATACMS missiles. And Russia said yesterday, there's going to be a response. Mm-hmm. And this warning by Lavrov not long ago, almost certainly is still.
Hold that. I want to ask you something, if you could. Please just hold that. I wanted to ask you, I read this in the Wall Street Journal. It's widely reported, but I know that you're a real expert. I don't know about this exact issue, but I would bet that you have the real knowledge here. Is it correct, sir, that it's a fact, like it's definitely true, that it takes American Special Operations Forces and or CIA and or contractors to fire these missiles because the Ukrainians cannot do it themselves? Is that a fact?
Whether it's special forces or not is debatable, but whether that it is American personnel, absolutely. Mm-hmm. You can't just, it's not like handing a rifle or even an M1 tank and saying, hey, go do whatever you want to do, and then they can take all this in. The thing can't fire, it can't find the target, and it can't navigate to the target without sophisticated help from the United States.
Now, I know, pardon me, but just to go back one step, on the HIMARS, they've said for more than a year that, well, yeah, we give them intelligence to target the HIMARS. They can't hit anything with a HIMARS unless we're helping them, and they get jammed anyway, but that's beside the point. But it takes America to give them the targeting data to even use them. So we already knew that about the HIMARS. But like on this one, we're not talking about a phone call. You're saying it takes an American on the ground pushing buttons to make the thing fire.
You can, at the launcher point, the Ukrainian can push the button, but the missile won't fly, and you can't get the target unless we actively help it get to where it's going. So there is more than even the HIMARS, though that ironically is really enough. When the HIMARS was first announced, my first comment was like, well, that's ridiculous. That just handing them a HIMARS launcher is not going to do anything, because if you don't have the intelligence and the targeting capability, it's not going to do any different than a howitzer. But then we found out that, well, we were giving them all that stuff, so they've been using it, but Russia figured out real quick how to neutralize that, and so that's why you never heard from HIMARS anymore, even though they still have them. Right. But these ones were actually hitting a target, and that's what's changed the situation here. And the point I want to make here is that Russia, I think Putin means what he says there. We didn't start this. We're not the one that turned this into an international war, and we want to negotiate an end with Trump to come in on January 20th. But if we don't, we're going to take action. And Lavrov said not long ago, he said, y'all need to be clear on something. If this turns into a war, you're not going to be safe by your oceans. He said, a lot of Americans seem to be content with it saying, hey, if World War III is fought, it'll be on European soil like World Wars I and II, but don't think it will be. And they have the means to make good on that. And listen, it's just beyond the pale to think that anyone would actually attack the continental United States. But even non-nuclear means with these missiles that Russia has, because they also have ICBMs that can be outfitted with non-nuclear warheads that can strike us here as well.
But imagine, Danny, an ICBM coming in and multiple warheads deploying from it. The assumption would have to be that each and every warhead is an H-bomb.
Then why would we ever go down a path where that becomes possible?
Exactly. It's just insane that they're playing with this much danger. And look, this is the problem with nuclear weapons, man. Like, I'm just living behind my own eyeballs now, and I know you are too, but let's just zoom out and pretend for just a second here. In the broad strokes of the history of humanity, this is really our plan, that we're going to hold thermonuclear bombs to each other's head in a giant Mexican standoff from now on. For the next 100 years and the next 100 years and the next 100 years. America, the planet divided by national governments holding thermonuclear weapons. That cannot end well. And you see what happens here. We're like, look, man, we got a red line. We'll use nukes. Once Lavrov says that, now what's he supposed to do? Back down? I mean, he can. But you get all this weird public choice theory kicks in where now it's not what's good for humanity and it's not what's good for the national interest. It's what's good for the politicians in charge that day. What if, let's say, worst case scenario, Putin nukes Atlanta and says, now, believe me, I'm really mad. So what do? Do we say, oh man, Joe Biden really got us into trouble. And we better, now that they've escalated, we better de-escalate. This really is all Barack Obama's fault, like it says in Scott Horton's book. We should quit while we've only lost Atlanta. No, you and I know, and anyone who knows anything about American nuclear doctrine knows that, no, we go to general nuclear war and we kill every city in Russia and they kill every city in the United States. They kill our military bases and they kill our cities. That's the plan. Use them or lose them. And in virtually every war game, going back to the 1980s, it always escalates to general nuclear war because everybody's afraid if they don't launch what they got's going to get hit and they'll lose it. And so that's the game plan. And, in Andrew Coburn's book, Rumsfeld, he talks about how in the 1990s, Rumsfeld would play the president in the war games. And no matter how they designed the game, he would always drive the thing to full-scale nuclear war. But then, and I actually have an excise chapter from my book that people are going to be able to get from my website on nuclear war. And when you talk about the history of the different war games in there, and it's not just Rumsfeld, no matter who you put playing the president in the different war games, once the nukes start going off, once the Russians have nuked Brussels and nuked London, America and DC, we launch everything. We got 1,000 aim points in Russia and they got 1,000 here. That's our whole civilization. As John F. Kennedy put it, everything that we have built for 2,000 years destroyed in an afternoon. 60 million people, a World War II worth of dead in the first couple of hours of the war. That's what general nuclear war would look like. And these people act like, well, come on. What are they going to do? What they have a red line, and you can see this. There are tweets going around like, come on, Russian nuclear weapons probably don't even work, Danny. Nothing works in Russia. I think it's a pretty safe bet. We can go ahead and get in a nuclear war and just expect that all of theirs are going to be duds. See? I mean, they say that at the Atlantic Council and stuff. Like, this is the kind of smoke that they're blowing up each other's rear ends here, the American War Party. They act like they're just picking on helpless, weak Saddam Hussein, who could never actually hurt America in a million years, who they're lying right to your mama's face, saying that this is a preemptive war to stop Iraq from attacking us. Please. Iraq was a kindergartner compared to a varsity football player. They could never, we've been bombing Iraq for 33 years. We could bomb them for another 33 years, and they can't do nothing about it. Fine. But Russia can. And they act like Putin is just weak, pathetic, impotent Saddam Hussein, but he's not. And they just don't let enough dissenting opinion through, man. They just you watch CNN, like all these people, they really think they're right about this stuff. They interview all their experts. You played that clip of Mr. National Security Officer there going, oh, yeah, don't worry. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We know what we're doing. Man, they're playing with thermonuclear fire, hotter than the sun. And over who controls the Donbass?
Yeah.
I know the American people already thought Ukraine was part of Russia anyway. The American people, we're fighting for the sovereignty of the Luhansk Oblast. Americans have never even heard the word oblast before. But I'm supposed to trade Austin, Texas,
Yeah.
where I'm from, for who has sovereignty over Dnipropetrovsk flip-flops in eastern Ukraine that no one can even pronounce? I mean, I know Ukrainians who cannot pronounce Dnipropetrovsk, that province between the river and the Donbass. No one can even say it. And quite frankly, we do not care who rules it. We don't. And we certainly are not willing to go to war over that. And so if we're not, then what are we doing? We're throwing away hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians for war that our side knew they were going to lose anyway. I bet you saw this, man, in the Washington Post, where David Ignatius goes, man, this war's been great. It's been great for American politics. It's been great for our defense industrial base. The military industrial complex is no longer a conspiracy theory. Now it's the defense industrial base, and it's wonderful. It's spectacular. We love it. And it's been great for the NATO alliance. We've expanded NATO. We've got increased military spending by NATO nations all across Europe. The war's been great for everyone. David Ignatius, CAA spokesman, says in the Washington Post. And then, Danny, he literally put in parentheses, except for the Ukrainians.
Wow. No,
Because
I
their
actually
lives
did
mean
not see that.
absolutely nothing to Washington, D.C. Nothing. In fact, there's a quote in the book of a senator talking about, well, we're degrading these Russians' lives. We're sending them home in body bags and coffins and making their mothers cry. And we're degrading Russia by killing their men. And we're saving American soldiers who are not on the ground and do not have to die. So the whole thing is great. And he doesn't even mention the Ukrainian men at all. So
And listen, that's just
value to destroy, and America
categorically
has
wrong.
value to preserve, but the Ukrainians' lives have no value whatsoever, not even worth mentioning.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of the things that's been anguishing me from the outset. We talked about that literally all the time since we've been talking about this on Daniel Davis Deep Dive. But he is categorically wrong there. Yes, they are sending Russian homes in body bags. And yes, it is very tragic for their families and they hate it. But no, it's not making Russia weaker. They are absolutely stronger now than they were in February 2022. Our actions have had the opposite effect. It has put us in graver danger. And now, as you just very articulately laid out, we're potentially at risk because of more stupid actions that could come. We could draw a nuclear weapon onto ourselves that should never be launched and that Putin doesn't even want to launch if we don't sober up real quickly. I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave it there right now, but folks, go back and find Provoked. You can find it on Amazon.com. You can't have my copy. I've got it, and I'm not giving it away. But it's a lot of great stuff in there. And again, Scott, kudos to you for having written that book and putting the truth out there again, like you always do. Really appreciate that and appreciate you. Thanks for coming on today and talking about this stuff.
Thank you, Danny. You're my hero.
Thank you very much, and appreciate you guys too. And we're going to come back to you later this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive with some more information. It's some of the breaking news. It's some of it's been happening even as we've been on the air here, and we will look forward to seeing you then on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.